Всем привет, это проект Alpha.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman and you're watching a War Diary with Alexey Arestovich. Alexey is connecting to us from afar. Hello. Yes, good evening everybody. I see you are traveling somewhere en route in a vehicle with a peculiar background. Alright, so we understand. Jokingly, I would say, are you traveling in Europe following Zelensky's tour through different countries, gathering what information is available and consulting? No, Nikolai, I'm touring United States and enjoying my life here. On occasion, I do meet those whom I call taxi drivers, right, in different places of power. And is it just American contacts here? Well, different. I have American contacts here, and the Europeans are visiting too. And I was jokingly saying that this world is full of taxi drivers, and they're actually the ones running it. Right? All right. Let's talk about Europe then. Politica made a publication, 5 questions of Zelensky for his tour in Europe and probability that he'll get the answers. They're posting that he's touring Europe to acquire additional support of European capitals. We are aware that Rammstein was moved. Formal reason was quoted as Hurricane Milton, that is supposedly one of the most complex, difficult hurricanes for the United States in the last 100 years. Regardless, do you think Zelensky's personal visits to capitals of Europe will replace the effect that could have been from Rammstein, which, by the way, was an adversarial, the number 25? No, Nikolai, there's no way for it to substitute one with another. First problem is that European aid cannot substitute American aid, neither by volume nor by actual articles and diplomatic support that comes with it. And one thing, when you hold position that is supported by the United States, and the whole other proposition is to hold your own position, perhaps with some agreement and some support from European capitals, but there is a big difference. And American suggestion has dwindled down to one variant, and transfer Rammstein actually is indicating that. That's one. Second, okay, President Biden could have stayed in the United States because of the hurricane, which actually has not acquired even 5 upon hitting the coast. It went through Florida, it hit Florida at category 3 and weakened down to 1, which was already forecast in advance. Blinken has nothing to do, however, defending his country in Florida from hurricanes, so he could have come to Rammstein. His task is foreign politics, but he also refused to come. Then there were 2 statements coming from the United States. Jackson, the leader of Congress, said that we're not going to fund Ukraine and Zelensky. I'm tired of funding them. And then the note came about Rammstein that it was moved to an undefined date, most likely till after the elections in the United States. And I can read that as a complete lack of support from the United States, because Ukraine is ignoring the only path forward that United States sees feasible. And that's what my contacts here are also telling me, those taxi drivers, right? They're basically saying that you guys need to sit down with Russians and figure out how to put the end to this war, perhaps on the front line as it is now. And it's understood, that position, because it's coming from the agreement of big players who have already negotiated that agreement on their level. And smaller players like Ukraine and Israel, they were not actively invited to the earlier negotiations, and they keep breaking dishes, trying to draw attention to their ways of solving their problems. And that causes some irritation with the bigger partners. However, Israel has a difference. He has more military-industrial complex in a working condition. They can provide up to 50% of their own supplies. And we definitely more dependent upon aid in Ukraine, up to 80%. And as a result, if America is sticking with one path forward, ceasefire, then Zelensky is trying to push a second option, perhaps talk to Brits and Europeans, and where it's the idea of European tour is coming from. But he's facing some headwinds too. Tauruses and some of the other missiles like Storm Shadows are not allowed for Ukraine to be used against Russian territory, Russia proper. Russia, by the way, on their side, are also holding the line. They're not attacking our energy infrastructure. So they're sticking with agreements they've struck with the bigger players. I want to also say that American representatives, they are very dissatisfied with the behavior of Ukraine. And you can segregate that into 4 elements here. You can read some of it leaking through the press, which is addressing Zelensky's peace plan as very nebulous, and it has several unacceptable positions as the use of American arms for strikes deeper in the Russian territory. Second, military is another issue. America considers Ukrainian military to be very incapable to provide right logistics, and American military is very cautious about supplying new nomenclature and bigger volumes to Ukraine because Ukraine cannot provide for safety and security of these supplies when they're accumulated. Ukraine General Command is insisting on bigger volumes, but our partners are saying that no, we cannot do that because Russians will immediately target those warehouses and will destroy all aid coming. That's why it comes in a dripper fashion in order to be completely and quickly sent out to the front, sent out to brigades. And when Ukraine comes out and says, no, we'll aggregate that and then we'll arm new brigades with these arms, Americans just shrugging their shoulders saying, how? Third is the approach of elites. And I was communicating with some of I keep calling them fellow taxi drivers. There was a small gathering today, a party, a picnic, and they're basically stating that according to their data, up to 40% of Western aid to Ukraine is being stolen. They're highlighting this as a catastrophe, and they're saying this is the main risk in that whole situation. Not that it may be solved as North and South Korea, or that Putin perhaps wants to acquire even more of Ukraine, but they're telling that your elites in Ukraine are corrupt. They're corrupt, they've been corrupting themselves for decades, and now everything that they get is basically dissolving in their hands as the wet toilet paper. And there is nothing we can rely on, and there's nothing you guys actually can rely on. With this situation, however much we transfer to you, you will not win. And the last pillar of this 4 is Ukrainian people. Because they're saying, look, your people actually up to 55-60% support pushing to the borders of 91, and this doesn't match reality. I start trolling some of these contacts Americans saying, what position would people take? What do you expect them to take? Let's give up all of the territories? And they're saying, no, not that. Let's cease fire, and we do have several $100 billion just for rebuilding of Ukraine. We have it in America to give you, but you need to cease fire to put the end of this hot conflict with Russia and then start rebuilding whatever you have left. And they're basically saying that there are different factors that contributing to the whole thing. And I'm quoting some movies here when there's no one single reason for a defeat. That genius movie about 17 Moments of Spring, well, Kaltenbrunner is outlining the authority, the ownership of defeat and for the Reich. And he's saying that, of course, people also bear responsibility. And when he's asked, what about people? Do they bear responsibility too in the same fashion as the leadership? Like, not in a different way, but they're supporting the trends that the leadership is relying on. Similar situation is happening right now in Ukraine. And here you face then, because our partners are displeased with this situation, but you can see that Rammstein is being moved. Germany is saying they will not be providing heavy armaments, heavy munitions from the stockpiles of Bundeswehr. They will only be transferring some of the newly manufactured items, and it's mostly air defense. And bigger players are saying that it's just you and Israel who are resisting from the big suggestion, big idea that is already coordinated by the bigger players. And when we sit down and ask you what plan do you have, you bring us some nebulous idea which cannot serve as the basis for any future progress. And still they're outlining that the main problem that Ukraine has is very corrupt elites. It's not Russia, it's not Korea, it's not China, it's corrupt Ukrainian elites. All right. So yeah, you can actually wave a hand. Oh, you mean the elites? No, no, my fellow taxi drivers. Okay. So what do we do with these elites? Is there any practicality we can derive from this? Is America suggesting us anything? No, they're telling us you're a sovereign state. You guys decide what you want to do with it. This is your personal responsibility. All of your dangerous classes, all of your classes that only are to become dangerous. But for now, you're still lulling yourself with the lullaby about the borders of 91. And we cannot take responsibility for your future destiny then. Then I'm countering that saying, okay, the front will collapse. What do you do then? Well, they're pairing me with the fact that there is a good offer on the table and you guys refusing to take it. That means you're responsible for whatever else happens on the front. So, Alexey, does it look like a last offer? And if you don't take it, then to hell with you? No, no, Nikolai, they will not completely abandon us. And we can see the limit of this. Dnieper River is the physical border, which is considered that Russians will not cross. But if we want to cross Dnieper and to only keep what is to the left of it, okay, that's our decision as the nation. There's nothing America can do about it. And then there is another issue. Okay, imagine the border is now along the Dnieper River. What will happen after? Elites will become better. They will become somehow uncorrupt. People will become smarter. There's nothing our partners outside of Ukraine can do with it. All right, but are there any recommendations, Alexey, that they can maybe give us behind the curtains in an unofficial way? Nikolai, in a personal statements, they're telling me different things, and I'm not going to quote them. It'll be too provocative for some part of our audience, and you can guess. They're telling you that you do have some experience as a nation, so draw parallels and think about it. At the very least, they're suggesting for population to stop supporting the false trends, because your elites coming here to United States, they rely on the statistics and saying that here, that's what we're doing because our people support that. We understand that some of this data is skewed, but still. The logic is very simple. There's only one offer on the table. No other options are going to be even considered. And us not receiving and not accepting this version will lead us to only more dwindling of any support coming from the West. Okay, so you told us, Alexey, that Russia is not attacking Ukraine energy systems, and that is an indicator of certain agreements that have happened. But these agreements happen not between Ukraine and Russia. We can see here that Ukraine is promising something, not to Russia, and Russia is promising something, not to Ukraine. So these two countries are not talking directly. Of course, and look, it's difficult for Putin to hold his promise now because we continue using our UAVs against his warehouses, against his industry, but they're still following that constraint. What do you think could have pushed Russia to stop attacking Ukraine energy systems? Whose position is such a heavy argument for Russia? You won't believe, but it's China and India, not even Americans and Britons. Because those two countries are first of all interested in seizing this war, stopping it, in developing Ukraine as the transportation hub on the way to Europe. Each of them in their own fashion, but even Modi would not have visited Ukraine if he would not be interested in our joint future and our cooperation. So, and one of the main keys to solving this problem, to preventing the second round of this war, is not only by getting support from the West, it's also lying in the establishing good relations with the global South and attracting Chinese, Indian, and Arab investments here, and maybe also from Brazil and Malaysia, because China created another group of support of peace in Ukraine. Not for nothing, it's another group of investors who are interested in Ukraine being a stable state. And this group will be able to explain to Russia why it doesn't make sense to make to go on another incursion into Ukraine and go for the second round of this war. And this is our interest, to make sure that we get those Chinese investments, that they actually take root here, and also make sure we coordinate that with the West, that We need the Global South to be present here, perhaps dress it up as a competitive but civilizational platform for trade, for where the West would meet East or South in this fashion. And instead, we are out there asking for what? For strikes on Russian territory. Okay, even if you start doing it, will you win this war by that? No, you won't. You need infantry on the battlefront in order to prevail in this war. And we can talk about that later. Right, Alexey. Let's address it a bit later. Let me ask you this. Can we offer additional terms, perhaps, how we see India and China working with us, so that the West would consider that and agree to this, perhaps, or work with us on this? Of course we can, Nikolai, but we need to be making these proposals. Everything in the world is achieved through communication and cooperation, through exchange. The question is, what are the questions that we're discussing? What is on the table? And first, I would suggest we need to research what our partners are interested in, what people in China and India are interested in, and then bring this plan in a better outlined format to our Western partners. And here's how we will support this plan in Ukraine, with the social media, with public support, with political support, economic and other ways we can support that. And that would be a more defined plan. These are the projects we consider, this is the changes in law that we need to implement, this is the way we treat public opinion, and everything, including Ukrainian railroads, are supportive of this plan, and that's how we'll proceed. That is something firm. But right now we have a slogan, let's strain and exert all our efforts in that perpetual fight. This is not taken seriously neither by Global South nor by the West. They're all interested in a different proposal, and we're giving them inadequate proposal instead. And they consider us to be inadequate to the current political moment and to the perspectives that the world needs to go towards. And they're considering us inadequate. This is they're getting more and more tired with this. Even now, especially now, when they have agreed about major features of this peace, and now they have Ukraine and Israel breaking dishes. And the answer is simple, dwindling of support. And if you don't believe the words of Arestovich and those taxi drivers walking by, then look at the facts. All of our hypotheses have facts. The anniversarial Rammstein is postponed. Over 50 heads of states were supposed to have been present. This is basically a second peace summit by this format. And there was supposed to be a meeting of Big 7 or Big 12 in this case to figure out how to continue helping Ukraine and what will be the future development like. But since they're not coming, this is a colossal pressure on Ukraine and their attempt to explain that we are acting silly. So, Alexey, this is kind of like a diplomatic slap in the face. Oh, that's even worse, Nikolai. This is more like a kick and a bump, because everybody knows that, everybody who has eyes and who lives in Florida, that is aware that there was no Category 6 hurricane, that all these excuses are just veneers, not to be too blunt about why they are postponing it. Okay, so in your view, what the West would agree to, and in what format to allow India and China to participate in Ukraine revival? Well, first of all, of course, it's trade, right? The logic is that Britain and the United States are the countries holding 2/3 of global trade, which is a sea trade, ocean trade, right? BRICS countries are discussing now whether they can create independent set of currency, independent of dollar and euro, and they're trying to figure out how to build their own economic system. In the West, they often call it Mongol Empire too. Doesn't matter how you call it, not too important. What important is that they're betting on optimizing the system of land trade in Eurasia. And whom else the West can trade with, right? This is the same Great Silkway. It's just Chinese want to have their own, India wants to have their own, and the West wants to have still their influence. And of course, here we have all the countries along this route, including Ukraine, that will be part of this project. And you'll need a system of ports, system of railroads. investments that were made back in the day by Soviet Union in the infrastructure around the Black Sea, not a single country can afford today, because Soviet Union was investing hundreds of billions of dollars for decades, and we still have parts of that infrastructure here. And that's why we're talking about the Black Sea as well, because Russia is also interested in having Black Sea navigable. And okay, we have pushed Russia out of Black Sea, and we've invested into the sea drones because we're showing that this got to be a demilitarized area where good trade has to happen. And West and Europe are interested in that. China and India are also interested in this concept. And India, by the way, is seen as new China by the West. To a degree, United States will accept that, and Britons have interest in this. So there is an interest in our territory as the zone where the interests of the global South and the West can meet. Despite of some animosity between them, they're still coexisting in the regime of a frenemy, both friends and enemies. And this is normal. We can become the area where these interests meet, and this is why this is one of the important articles that should be on the table for discussion. Another important element of architecture of safety in the world is Israel, because the security and safety of Suez Canal for oil transportation is also important for the world. So both Global South and the West are interested in having these territories as without war, without active conflicts there. So, and I apologize for me moving here. It's difficult to hold the phone and sit in a car. It's a bit unusual for me, but doing a stream like this. But this is a good position that we need to use. Potentially, it is a very lucrative position. People on the West, the ones who see it further, they already see how it can be capitalized, how it can be used for global trade. However, Ukraine is still kicking back, is not going for that new Yalta agreement that is agreed generally behind the scenes by the main 5 geopolitical players. What do you think will happen to Ukraine for being so reluctant? Nothing good, right, Alexey? Exactly, you can imagine. All right, let me clarify one more thing. Among the countries that you mentioned, Turkey, Central Asia, it seems that there is a need for Ukraine, or there is a reason for Ukraine to consolidate its position with Tehran, with the Turkish world, Azerbaijan. Yes, with everybody, Nikolai. A good geopolitical gameplay implies working with everybody. Europe, United States, Turkish countries, Far East and Asia, and of course Brazil and Africa. And if you want to understand whom to work with, look at the group that Brazil and China created in the United Nations. We talked about them before, I think 3 weeks ago, the Friends of Peace in the United Nations. These are the countries that are directly invested into getting, or interested rather, into getting peace resolution for Ukraine so they can invest and earn on the redevelopment. Yes, indeed, there are these countries, Friends of Peace. There are 15 countries, I'm looking it up. Right, Nikolai, go from Kenya, Zambia, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Hungary, Brazil, China. And who are observers there? France and Switzerland. Right. These countries are not for nothing in that list. If you look at that, these are global money, global production, global infrastructure, and global agriculture that are interested, and a couple countries that came there to make this group heavier, right? And even in Africa, they have some interest. Perhaps they have Chinese investments, and China is asking them to root and support them in this. So there are countries economically interested in this situation, in ceasefire and in peace agreement. So we could have become a global partner for the West and for the global South. And instead, we are breaking dishes in a shop, and people will not tolerate it for long. The world is a rather rough place, including global politics, and however much smiles and nice days are going to be exchanged and said in the official mode, everything is pretty rough and stern on this gameplay. And as a country, we, as Ukraine, are conducting a very mindless politics right now, and it will have bad repercussions for us. Okay, Alexey, these Friends of Peace in the United Nations, that is a rather big initiative. of the international scale as well. Is there anything known about our interaction, how Ukraine interacts with these countries? Nothing. Just nothing, Nikolai. No representation, nobody's talking to them. We became essentially a battlefield between the West and the Global South. Global South is giving us their hand. And what are we doing? At best, we maybe talk about some private interests, like with India, but we're failing to summarize and to make it a bigger platform. All right, so there was more information, and I'm here Googling some of it, that Andrei Yermak was working with the Global South and was making his bet and meeting with the youth leaders of the Global South. And what now? Is that on pause? Because looks like the Global South actually created the initiative to work with us, but we're not meeting it. Well, first of all, Nikolai, Andrei Yermak is not all powerful. Whatever myths are there, he is one person. He is, of course, very industrious, and I think he will keep his initiatives, but it's not only up to him. So behind that, there is the direct will of President Zelensky. Of course, Zelensky and some other players who are interested in, for example, our big export players who prefer certain schemas to be kept when they pay money to corrupt government in Ukraine and milk the budget, and they send their goods like timber and some agriculture stuff to Europe, and they're not interested in changing anything. So they're lobbying actively to not consider these new initiatives. And these are our inner policies of elites. And we're talking about the collective will of elites. There's a collective will of people in Ukraine who somehow prefer to be drowned in a bucket of that ideology that is being fed to them. And the West is outlining that it's not just Zelensky. They understand that Zelensky is a leader of it, but there are other elements. And they're talking, you can read the Western press, they're writing about it, that Zelensky's plan is too nebulous. They're also highlighting military leadership of Ukraine that is inadequate in the way they solve these issues. However much we transfer to you, it will be destroyed or stolen or misused. And then elites that help to trick the masses to continue be deceived. All right, if we take the Western press, and I'm reading Spiegel here now, that in Ukraine they're discussing conclusion of this war without full taking back of all the occupied territories, and perhaps there is another German model in the making for Ukraine. And we talked about that a few streams ago when you said that all these German models, all these NATOs and EUs, this is all lies. This is a pseudo-agenda. This is not real. It's not what we'll get as a result. Well, of course, there is a pseudo-reality. And of course, they're putting a carrot in front of us, Nikolai, so that would be a bit more agreeable. And they're not fully honest, right? But we also need to understand that we immediately contradict that. We immediately counter it, saying that no, we're not discussing it. We're not talking about peace agreements in Ukraine. We're not trading our territories. And the answer here in the West, one simple answer: you guys are insane. You're untrainable people. When they see these reactions, they're saying that you guys are mindless in your solutions, and it seems like you're failing to learn. Yeah, you're basically a whole generation of Ukrainians that is very difficult to work with. These are like Bourbons who came back after Napoleon, and when Talleyrand saw them, their style of leadership said they did not forget anything and they did not learn anything. So that's Ukraine. We're still stuck in our old ways. Okay, so Alexey, that story about joining NATO and freezing the conflict, it started to actually permeate public opinion and some bloggers here in Ukraine, where some of them are actually connected closer to position of power. I'm trying to present that as an example of dialogue. Sergei Stranenko and Velachenko, two bloggers that I think you know them. There was an interesting dialogue between them. Sergei asked Lachenko if he was a president to a scenario in a difficult situation that we are. We freeze along the current front, we join NATO, and we get the guarantees. To which Volchenko said, this is a setup, you should not be asking these questions. And asking him back the same question, his respondent said that, no, I'm not 30, I cannot be a president, according to Constitution. And they still continue discussion saying that we likely will not be taken into NATO because in this case, if the war unfreezes, our partners will have to fight. And do you see them being ready for this? And I think this conversation between the popular younger bloggers, YouTubers, how the narratives are created for the inner audience and what is happening there, what is brooding there. Well, Stranenko is a little rat and Volochenko is best mommy's son. These people are sitting on the elites' money, they're serving the purposes of elites. So let's discuss Xi Jinping and Putin. This is our level. Who are these two? Understandably, as a dialogue that may be interesting, because, right, that's what they get money for, in order to form and shape up certain public opinion. They are the serving group for anti-elites, which are holding Ukraine hostage. And if we start discussing the behavior of service people to the elites, I don't want our stream to go down to that low level. Let's stay on the level of Xi Jinping. All right, Alexey, let's, I'm trying to bring here different opinions, and some people express an opinion who are related sort of to the current power, and they're saying that, you know, whatever the Western allies are saying, we don't quite believe them. And then there are people who are actually fighting on the front, and they bring a different angle to that. Kirill Veres, he is a commander of 52nd Brigade. He's already saying that I do not see how we can get to the borders of 91. I will be sincerely apologizing if somehow that is possible, but I don't see the basis for us to dream about the borders of 91. So there are some sober opinions, but those are usually expressed by people who have direct relation to the situation on the front, who are fighting there, or who are trying to be logical in evaluating the current situation. And then there are other people who could be rational and maybe even get an order to be more rational, but yet they still refuse to do that. That's a big contrast in this, right? All right, Nikolai, it's very simple. There are anti-elites in Ukraine. What are anti-elites? These are people who have resources and the project of development. Then there are masses who have no project of their own and they don't have resources of their own. They're the victims in some fashion, and they're just a building material for one solution or another. And very often it's relation between elites and masses that shape up where the country goes. Then there is bureaucracy that should be implementing the process of going to a certain goal. And as I said, there are elites and anti-elites. Elites are interested in development of the country, but anti-elites, they're not interested in development of the country. They only imitate the development, but they're interested in making money. And they use certain levers to create false reality for people, to deceive them about real situation in the country. That's why I'm saying Lochenkov and Sternenko, they're the rats picking the crumbs from the table of elites and who are trying to push the elites' opinion to the people. And elites are continuing to make money on this and to work hand in hand with bureaucracy. And then you have a battle battalion commander who, unlike these guys, is on the front. And he understands clearly. And at the beginning of his phrase, he is saying that here I'm thinking about how do I hold my current positions? What positions of the 91, what border of 91 are you talking about? And 54th Brigade is one of the most talented and most effective brigades. And, you know, it is these voices like his on one side, and then all the different YouTubers and Telegram channels who are talking to us about some remote victory and the borders of 91. But there is a difference. While Veres battalion commander is dying and his men are dying to hold the current positions, these little rats are buying 10th, 12th, 15th apartment for the money of those anti-elites, because they continue pushing that conjecture about the borders of 91, about North Korea, that will soon emerge on the front on the Russian side, and the West needs to support Ukraine immediately, and that the West will eventually prevail, and They're just ignoring the position of big five players who already have agreed about everything, and they're not interested in continuing this conflict. And here, the message to our listeners in Ukraine is that your responsibility is on you. Whom do you listen to? Are you listening to the rats or to the battalion commanders? Because the consequences of your support will lead you to a different situation where you will be carrying the consequences, the blunt part of what happens if the front collapses, right? If you have chosen to like the anti-elites and support a certain trend ideologically or by internal, just staying quiet, that's it. And you will not have anyone else to blame. When you'll be put in a bus and be killed in a grove somewhere, or maybe you end up in Veres's battalion who'll use you more smarter, who'll use you more effectively. But even in this interview, he said that even I, the battalion commander who is trying to use people in the best shape possible, in the best way possible to preserve their lives, but going to the army now is a very difficult situation, because current mobilization, if you're not well trained, if you're getting to the more complex part of the front, you have 3 weeks left to live after draft. After that, you're dead. And I'm asking our people in the country, are you going to support those who are washing the reality for anti-elites who are getting rich on this? Or are you going to support people who are actually telling you what reality is, who are fighting this war? Are you ready to follow the consequences, to face the consequences? Somebody will die in that grove defending unknown area. And the others, perhaps if they live, they'll see that their big country is now drained down the toilet and everything is about some elites getting money. Look, people, if just the head of MSEC recently, just a very provincial thing, was found to have $6 million in cash on one of the corruption cases, can you imagine the amounts of money floating up on the higher levels? And that's what the system is supporting now. Are you ready to support that? Are you ready to continue having the very low life expectancy like we do now as a society? Our average man lives, 64 years? Are we ready as a society to fit our lives into the banknotes for anti-elites and to just support them? And they use that money to buy more property, more real estate, more businesses in other countries, here in Europe or in the United States. And your kids will be dying in groves while their kids will be studying in Oxfords and Yales. And your kids maybe will be in occupied territories with a prohibition to speak your own language, your own Ukrainian. Or prohibition to speak Russian if on the remaining part of the country. That's why I suggest you do not mix the matter of defending the country and defending the system. And I would give you a different visual here. Ukraine is the cow that we all like, our favorite cow that gives us milk and all. And then there is another mafia, another anti-elite group that is sucking blood of that cow. They're like a big octopus that somehow is attached to it, and it's a monster creature that is sucking out all the juices out of it. And we're trying to train you to see the difference between one and the other, so you would not be able to say that you have not heard that. On any evolutionary level, a person may be illiterate, but life is always sending you all the signs, and you're always personally responsible for reviewing the signs or not. And that's it. And in the near future, what is it, half a year till maybe April, you'll have a fantastic chance to get more confirmations. And I hope some of you become wiser on the catastrophe that we're going to face soon, because what will be, it's a moral catastrophe that we have lost this war. And you'll have to come to reality with this. And we've been saying for a long time that we are warriors of light, that we are fighting for good, but okay, even me personally and many people here in the States, they are not sure that it'll be enough for this catastrophe to teach you different ways in Ukraine. That's why each person is responsible personally for that trend, for where the country goes. Alex, I think it's important to quote for me to talk more about what that battalion commander said in his interview. The question to him was what went wrong with mobilization, what should be done differently. I think after this question, he basically was quiet for 5 seconds, then he exhaled and said, okay, I'll say as it is. Under the contract, in invisible ink, what it says is, go and die in 3 weeks. And people are ready to fight still. And when people go to fight a war, one thing is when they go to war and they know that chances are they'll come back and they still have plans for 2 years after. But when you're facing reality, when only future for you is quick death, I understand why people do not want to come help us on the front. And there is it's upon us to change that, but there is a big difference between just saying and doing something. Mr. Bortnikov, speaking of ideological services, also recently said another statement servicing the current anti-elites that our treatment of our soldiers should be very similar to how Russia is treating their soldiers. And I was taking notes of some of these phrases come of these talking heads this last week. I think they already start to understand that it is a crisis moment upon Ukraine. Those who are not too dulled down by propaganda, they start seeing that masses start to refuse their support to anti-elites and their support network. Today, Congressman Adienko was saying 6 million people are not getting to the military drafting points. They're not registering. They're refusing their support. Well, you seriously think there are 6 million of cowards in the country? All of them, or many of them, could have become great fighters, and they would be fighting for their country if there was a project to defend for, and not the anti-project of devouring them and their future. Because right now, this project is devouring our citizens. We're telling a lot about how horrible was Holodomor, with 6 or 9 million deceased, but if we look at the number of Ukrainians, how much our country has dwindled since '91, that current anti-system is actually devouring its own citizens. And don't mix defending Ukraine on the battlefront, because nobody wants Putin to be here, right? Nobody sober can understand, can accept that reality when Putin is in Ukraine. But as long as you're listening to that elite service groups, as long as you're liking and supporting these anti-elites, you are eating the future of your own and the future of your children. Because that implies that our nation as a group is rather dumb if you continue doing it. And there is nothing we can do to support you except for these weekly streams trying to explain to you what reality is, what is hiding behind that pseudo-reality cocoon that propaganda has put on your heads. That real reality is rather different. You could have been different, free citizens making your own decisions and not scared people hiding under their sofas from the draft. When people are asking me, what can we do? Well, at least don't watch them, don't like them, don't give them stats, don't express support. It's even more useful if you go and like some pretty girls in your social networks. Or the Asgard ladies, it's better, at least less harm for the country, because all these folks are supporting anti-elites and doing their propaganda. They're the same service group, they're just screwing up the whole country. I want to also bring another note here, Alexey. There was another guy who was sent to command the Asgard detachment. And Asgard was considered to be one of the battle-worthy detachments on the front, who've been rather successful, and they've destroyed a lot of enemies. But here's an example where a person goes to the army without any rank, any commanding status. He's being sent as a civilian to command this group. He's coming there as a civilian bureaucrat, as an aide to some leader in this group. He has no legal rights to command this group, but he's being sent there to command them. How do you understand this reality? Okay, here's a good movie I want to recommend, Monsoon. This is the strait in the Baltic Sea, about the defense of it in 1916-17, the defense of Petrograd, and the destiny of the White Army officer of Russian Empire, and his destiny compared to the destinies of the sailors. And the problem is very similar to these days. The problem of the army is that there are a lot of activists now in the army. They're like akin to those Baltic sailors, Baltic seamen who were back in 1916 trying to change the ways of the Imperial Army. And they can do a lot of things, they could be heroes, They could have been shooting down a lot of the enemy targets, but when they come up with the statements, let's remove the code because the code is outdated, let's make a commander a friend of soldiers, they don't understand that by this they actually get these bureaucrats being sent to them because he is a sponsor somehow and he now has a right to command them. And they will do anything, including a BJ, if he asks them to. So, in reality, the code is a necessity. There is a group of legal boundaries created for a reason, which are important even in peace times, but in military times, in war times, it is super important to follow, to adhere to the code. Because that clown could have been easily shot and killed there. You can write 3 papers and close that matter if really they would be upset with this. Because some person who has no clue about how to fight the war, he'll be commending me and telling me how to fight. He's not even a cadre officer. And instead of going to the social media and screaming there, guys, you just need to read your code. If soldiers, if officers knew the code better, there's a ton of legal ways to remove this commanding person, how to stop him. And there is no way to even get punished for that or to get reprimanded for that. There are other ways how you could cover up even more drastic measures, but seriously, it's ridiculous when the military just appeal to the social media that these extraordinary things are happening, because of course I'm sympathizing with Asgard. I don't know them personally. Perhaps they have shot a lot of enemy on their part of the front, but for us, for me as an officer, going to the public media and expressing your concern with a new commander who is not a military, read the code, because you should know it. If you are an active military unit, you need to know that code. And the law gives you rights to not only disobey this person, but also to even execute him if he is not following the military orders and commands. Why you are so quiet? Why are you so just calm and still weathering it? Why are you tolerating his command? This is a symptom of a much more difficult disease, because the army somehow is trying to use social media to organize and to manage itself, instead of self-organizing according to the code that we already have. I understand some of the cadre also allow that treatment, but at least they understand that you don't even need to let the civilian onto the territory of the military detachment if you don't want him to. Guys, social media is not the way to go. This is the other side of your activism. You allowed the activism in the military, and now you're eating all that crap of activism. We're supportive of you, of course, but please go use the code. If you knew it better, you would have 10 ways to Sunday what to do, how to address these, whoever advisors, whoever relative, even if he is sent there by the commander-in-chief, but he is not a military cadre. If he doesn't know the password, the person on duty could have shot you at the spot. Just one thing that you know, the person on duty should have called the Guardian, could have done a warning shot and then shot him with a second one, so that there's no gun oil on the bullet. I mean, there is a ton of ways. Alexey, you're giving very weird advice. Well, no, it's not weird advice. It's what's written in the code. The Sentinel is supposed to make a warning shot if somebody doesn't know the password. And the first bullets, if the weapon is kept clean, the first bullets need to go in the air, so that the second or third bullet, if he shoots the violator, would have no oil on the bullet. And many Sentinels, sometimes there are accidents, they shoot at the intruder immediately. No, first you have to make a warning shot. All right, I need to say here, we're not calling upon anybody to use violence to resolve it. Of course we're not, Nikolai. We're just discussing how the code outlines certain things, that how could they have happened. And I can tell you one story here. A person that I've studied with, he was a young lieutenant, he was commanding a guard duty. It was back in '98, and some inspection brain humped him for some deficiencies on the territory of the unit. So he lined up his people and told them to clean up the square, clean up the territory. And that reminds of an older joke where the inspector officer found 18 deficiencies on a shovel, and the the person, instead of outlining all 18, just throws out the shovel and says, write one, no shovel. So he had some people who are about to finish their service, and they refused. They refused to clean up. He put them in the line, got the one who was mostly vocal against fulfilling his orders, and he ordered him. He called him out of the line. He ordered him to clean. And the soldier said, no, I'm not going to. So he made a warning shot in the air, and after that he shot that soldier dead. Because the guard duty, even in peace times, is controlled by a different code. It's very unusual for civilians, but the guy was not even reprimanded. That officer was just transferred to a different unit, and everything was matching the code. You cannot disobey the order. And, instead of crying in a social media, guys, read the code. Find ways to deal with issues that you're facing. Everything is written out there. If you don't know it, then don't be surprised that you're humped by some civilians who are friends or buddies or just sponsors of some people in the higher military rank. Of course, I sympathize with you, but still, read the code. Well, this is strange, Alexey, when the order can go about anything, and if you don't fulfill the order, for example, if the order is going against the code, what do? In the army, you still have to follow the order, Nikolai. You can just report on the violation after. And there are thousands of ways written out in the code how to not follow the wrongful order. I know these details, but those people who are drafted, who are not trained properly, they have not studied these documents. Reach out to me, I'll try to help. The problem is whether you'll be able to really use this advice, because you need to know the code. By the end of the first year, future officer needs to know all the codes better than colonels. And starting on the second year in school, when colonel was stopping us and telling us, you do this, we actually knew the code. We were telling them, no, article this, subarticle this doesn't allow you to give this order. I do not have to follow it. And even the colonel would take a pause and nod. This is how you work with the system. You need to know the details. When you're an activist, very often they just neglect to know the basics, and then you become the bad activist. I take no pity on them, but I sympathize with them. So if some civilian who has no business of being in my detachment would try to command me, I know the code. I know what to tell to the prosecutors. It's a war. Many things can happen. All right. I'll clarify a situation about young cadets or young newly draftees. Perhaps a colonel give him an order, stopped him, and gave an order, and you don't know the code. Well, what do they do? Simplest answer, Nikolai, you're not my direct commander. My commander gave me a different order that I'm rushing to fulfill. According to code, you know what the colonel needs to do? Find his direct commander and explain why I have to stop executing his command and start to execute a new command. But my direct commander can also tell this colonel to go F himself, because, it depends. And that's what, if he's not direct subordinates, that's exactly what they do. It's a rather simple thing. I don't need to do anything. As a cadet or as a newly draftee, I have an order to go to the library and read the book. You need to find the platoon commander who gave me this order and then explain why the new order needs to be done. Do you think he'll go do it? And then how will he find me or the commander of the platoon? And when he's asking me, where is your commander of a platoon? I don't know. He's my commander. I have no checks on him. He is responsible for tracing me, but I'm not responsible for tracing him. Colonel, you have to go find him on your own. All right. Thank you for this fascinating excursion. And let's go back to our agenda. Mikhail Podolyak came out with a big statement. In brief, it says that Russia is not achieving their results on the front. The depletion of their resources is obvious. Today we have all means to win and prevail. And if you look at the title of the Welt, the way it published, that Ukraine has a mathematically approved model of winning over Russia in this war. Okay, mathematical model. Alexey, you probably know some formulas or something that could probably indicate that mathematic model. Yes, I do, Nikolai. And I know also that these formulas or the way they're used right now are not matching the reality. Because when we have on paper a battalion and we give them a territory as a battalion to hold, but it could be just a battalion of 12 people. This is the weakness of a classic Soviet school where a detachment is called a detachment as long as they have a battalion commander and his limping deputy. That's already a battalion. Another thing is the coefficient of battle effectiveness. If you bring up this data, you need to remove this battalion from the front and to refit it and put new people in it. But I don't know who gave these numbers to Misha, but I can say that, well, if you are mathematically winning, why are you screaming about the danger from Korea? If you have all chances to prevail, or North Korea is horrible and it'll crumble our front, let's ask for the Western aid. What mathematical calculations? United States are going to give us all F-35s? Or they attack China, North Korea, and Iran and Russia with their nukes? What's mathematics there? Because if he's saying mathematical, please show mathematics. But immediately after that statement, the president will present, in general, without detail, the path forward, because mathematical detail is secret data. Well, you can maybe pay money to your bloggers so that Lachenko and others would be talking about it. But why do you expect everybody and professionals like us to understand and just stay mum what you're doing with this? And also, do you think the Western allies will understand how you want them to understand your pseudo-mathematical calculations, or you're also hiding these numbers from them because they're secret? And if you did show them the numbers, why does the Western media say that your plan is very nebulous and has no concrete suggestions? And if your plan is so, mathematics is so great, why did they postpone Rammstein? I think, Alexey, they're probably recalculating the numbers, right? Exactly. They're probably out there running on the calculator. Let's meet later. So these are just fairy tales. I experience sympathy to Michael, to Misha, who has to serve President Zelensky, who needs to serve these messages, which are generally anti-people, anti-system messages, because you're creating pseudo-reality that will destroy us. But each one has picked its own path. I left the office to not carry out these tasks. He continues to work there. End of the first hour.